Maria was a quiet woman who never liked to draw attention to herself. She lived in a small town where everyone knew each other's business, but few really knew her. People saw her every morning walking down the cobblestone street with her worn-out shoes and an old brown bag in her hand. She worked as a housekeeper for one of the rich families on the hill, and that had been her routine for almost 10 years. To most people, Maria was just another simple woman trying to make a living. She didn't wear fancy clothes, didn't wear makeup, and her hair was always tied in a low bun. When she smiled, her eyes carried a quiet kindness, though her face showed the tiredness of someone who had worked too much and rested too little. Every morning before sunrise, she would light a small lamp in her modest home, prepare a cup of tea, and sit by the window for a few minutes. It was the only moment she had for herself before the day began. Outside, she could hear the birds waking up, the sound of distant church bells, and sometimes the faint melody of someone playing music from another house. She always listened carefully to that music. It reminded her of something she had buried deep inside, something she once loved but had to let go of long ago. When Maria was younger, life had been very different. She grew up in a home filled with music. Her father used to play the violin, and her mother loved to sing while cooking. When Maria was about 10, she saw a piano for the first time in a local church. It was old, a little out of tune, but to her it looked like magic. She would sneak into the church after service, press a few keys, and marvel at how the sound filled the room. One day, the priest noticed her curiosity and asked if she wanted to learn. That simple question changed her world. He taught her the basics, and soon she was playing small hymns. Later, when she turned 16, she started working part-time to pay for piano lessons from a retired music teacher who lived nearby. She practiced every chance she got, even late into the night, dreaming of one day playing in front of people, not for fame, but to make them feel something, the way music always made her feel. But dreams often fade when life gets hard. Her father passed away unexpectedly, and her mother fell ill soon after. Maria was the only one left to take care of her younger siblings. The piano lessons stopped. The small savings she had for her future went to medicine and food. Days turned into months, and music slowly became a luxury she couldn't afford anymore. Years went by, and responsibilities replaced dreams. Her siblings grew up and left, her mother passed on, and Maria found herself alone with little more than memories. She took the first stable job she could find, cleaning and maintaining the big house on the hill. It was honest work, and though it was tiring, she did it with care and pride. She believed that if something had to be done, it should be done well. The family she worked for was kind in their own way, though distant. They were wealthy, educated, and always busy with social events. The lady of the house, Mrs. Delgado, was elegant and sharp-tongued but fair. Her husband, Mr. Delgado, was quiet and often away on business. They had a teenage daughter, Sophia, who was polite but usually lost in her own world of friends, fashion, and music. Maria liked Sophia. She reminded her of herself when she was young, full of dreams, always humming a tune, always smiling. Sometimes when Maria cleaned the living room, she would hear Sophia practicing piano. The family owned a grand piano that stood near the large window overlooking the garden. The sound of it filled the entire house. When Sophia wasn't around, Maria sometimes stood by the door for a few seconds just to listen. Once, when no one was home, she dared to touch the keys again. Just once. Her fingers trembled as she pressed a few notes. The sound was softer than she remembered, but still full of life. She closed her eyes and played a small melody she used to love. It felt like breathing again after years underwater. But as soon as she heard the car pull up outside, she quickly wiped the keys clean and went back to her chores. No one ever knew. Maria's life moved quietly, one day blending into another. She didn't complain. She believed in doing her work honestly, being kind and staying out of trouble. The people in town respected her for that. Children greeted her on the street. Shopkeepers smiled when she walked in, and her neighbors often said she was the kind of woman who made the world gentler just by being in it. Still, there were times when she felt a small ache in her heart, a longing for something more. Not luxury, not fame, but meaning. She missed the way music made her feel, the way it connected her to something invisible yet powerful. But she told herself that life had chosen another path for her, and she had accepted it. Every Sunday she went to church, not just for faith, but for peace. The church still had that old piano, though it was rarely played anymore. Sometimes the priest asked her to help with small things, arranging flowers or lighting candles. Once, when he found her sitting near the piano after Mass, he smiled and said, "It's been a long time since this instrument was played beautifully." Maria only smiled and replied, "Some things are meant to stay silent." She didn't tell him that her fingers still remembered every note. One afternoon, Mrs. Delgado informed her about an upcoming party. "It's very important," she said. "People from the city are coming. Everything must be perfect." Maria nodded as always. She spent the week polishing every corner, washing curtains, arranging flowers, and setting the dining hall with careful precision. She didn't complain even when her back ached. She just wanted everything to be right. As the day of the party arrived, the house glowed with lights. The garden was filled with laughter, the smell of food, and the soft hum of chatter. Music played from the speakers, and guests danced on the patio. Maria moved quietly among them, serving drinks and clearing plates, unnoticed as usual. But there was one thing that caught her attention: the piano. It had been polished that morning and placed in the corner of the grand hall. Sophia had planned to perform a short piece for the guests, something she had been practicing for weeks. Maria looked at it from across the room and felt a strange pull in her chest. Later that evening, Sophia came to Maria, looking nervous. "Can you bring me some water, please?" she asked softly. "I'm supposed to play soon." Maria nodded and smiled. "You'll do beautifully," she said, handing her the glass. Sophia smiled weakly. "I hope so. Everyone here expects perfection." Maria watched her walk away, remembering the same pressure she once felt when playing as a teenager. Music wasn't just about notes or speed. It was about feeling. She wished she could tell Sophia that, but she stayed silent. The guests gathered around as Sophia began to play. Her fingers moved quickly, hitting every note perfectly. The crowd clapped politely when she finished. But Maria noticed something. Though the performance was flawless, it felt empty. The emotion was missing. She sighed quietly and returned to her work. That night, when most guests had left and the music stopped, Maria stayed behind to clean. The room was dimly lit. The air smelled of wine and perfume, and the piano sat quietly in the corner again. She walked over, ran her hand gently along its surface, and whispered, "You must be tired too." She didn't see Mrs. Delgado watching her from the doorway. The next morning, life went back to normal. Maria continued her chores, unaware that soon everything would change. She didn't know that at the next gathering, she would be asked to do something she never imagined. Something meant to embarrass her, but that would reveal the part of her soul she had long hidden from the world. For now, she was just a simple woman living her simple life, unaware that destiny was slowly walking toward her, one quiet step at a time. A few weeks after the last party, the big house on the hill started buzzing again. Mrs. Delgado had decided to host another gathering, this time larger and more glamorous. She called it an evening of culture. Important guests from the city were coming, business partners, old friends, and a few people she wanted to impress. For days, the household was filled with noise and movement. Decorations arrived, extra staff came in to help, and everyone seemed to be in a rush. Maria, as always, worked quietly in the background. She didn't complain about the long hours or the endless instructions. She cleaned, arranged, and served with care, as she always did. But this time something felt different. There was a certain tension in the air, a kind of pressure that made even the laughter sound forced. Sophia was helping her mother plan the event, but she didn't seem as cheerful as usual. She had exams at school and barely had time to rest. Yet Mrs. Delgado insisted that Sophia should perform again at the gathering. "It will show your refinement," she said one morning while sipping her tea. "A cultured young lady must know how to entertain." Sophia nodded, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. Maria overheard the conversation while dusting the shelves. She could feel the girl's unease, but she said nothing. Later that afternoon, Sophia found Maria in the kitchen polishing silver trays. "Do you think I have to play again?" she asked quietly. Maria looked up. "Only if you want to," Sophia sighed. "Mother says people expect it. But I don't think I'm ready. Last time I made small mistakes and she noticed." Maria smiled gently. "Even the best players make mistakes. What matters is not perfection, but how you make people feel." Sophia thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. You sound like a teacher. Maria chuckled softly. Maybe I was in another life. It was a simple exchange, but it left Sophia thinking. The evening of the event came sooner than expected. The house shone brighter than ever. Strings of lights decorated the garden and the scent of roses filled the air. The guests arrived in beautiful clothes, their laughter echoing through the halls. Maria moved quietly among them, serving drinks and keeping everything in order. She wore her simple uniform, a neat white blouse and dark skirt, blending into the background like she always did. Inside, the large hall had been arranged like a stage. The grand piano stood near the corner, polished and perfect, ready for Sophia's performance. Guests mingled nearby, sipping wine and chatting about business, travel, and art. Among them was a woman named Clara, a friend of Mrs. Delgado from the city. She was well-dressed, confident, and had a sharp tongue. Clara noticed Maria as she passed by with a tray of glasses. Her lips curved into a small smirk. "Who is that woman?" she asked Mrs. Delgado in a voice that others could hear. "Your maid looks so serious, as if she's attending a royal concert instead of serving drinks." Some guests chuckled. Mrs. Delgado gave a polite smile. "Oh, that's Maria. She's been with us for years." "Very reliable," Clara raised an eyebrow. "Reliable, yes, but she looks too proud for a maid." "Doesn't she ever laugh?" Mrs. Delgado tried to change the topic, but Clara wasn't done. She had the kind of personality that enjoyed making others uncomfortable for her own amusement. "Do you think she knows anything about music?" she asked suddenly, glancing toward the piano. "Perhaps she should play something for us." The people around her laughed lightly, thinking it was a joke. Maria froze where she stood, pretending not to hear. Mrs. Delgado frowned slightly. "Don't be ridiculous, Clara. She's not here to entertain guests." But Clara continued, her voice growing louder. "Oh, come on. It would be fun. Look at her hands. She probably doesn't even know which key is which. Let's see what happens." Some of the guests laughed again, and the sound cut through Maria's chest like a blade. She felt her face grow warm, but she kept her head down. She had learned long ago that silence was her best protection. Sophia, who had just entered the room, overheard the comment and looked uncomfortable. "Mrs. Clara," she said softly, "Maria is not—" But Clara waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, don't be so serious, dear. It's just a little fun. We'll all have a laugh." The crowd was already turning toward the piano. Clara's voice had drawn their attention, and now several guests were whispering, curious to see what would happen. Some even encouraged the idea. Mrs. Delgado hesitated. She didn't want to upset her friend or seem impolite, so she turned to Maria and said gently but firmly, "Maria, would you mind? Just a few notes for amusement." It wasn't a request. Maria stood frozen. Her heart pounded so hard she could feel it in her throat. For a moment she wanted to run. She wanted to disappear through the back door and never return. But she saw the eyes on her, so many eyes filled with expectation and laughter. She nodded slowly, her voice barely above a whisper. "If you wish, madam." The room went quiet. Maria walked toward the piano with small, careful steps. Every sound, the clink of glasses, the whisper of silk dresses, seemed louder than usual. When she reached the piano, she stood still for a moment, staring at the shiny keys. Her hands trembled slightly. Someone in the back whispered, "This should be interesting." Another guest chuckled. Maria sat down. The bench creaked softly beneath her weight. She placed her hands on her lap for a moment, trying to steady her breathing. She hadn't touched a piano since that quiet night when she was alone in the hall, and now she was expected to play in front of people who wanted to laugh at her. She looked around the room once more. Sophia stood near the doorway, her face full of worry. Mrs. Delgado looked tense. Clara smiled, waiting for the show she had started. Maria took a slow breath. She placed her fingers gently on the keys. They felt cold under her touch. For a moment, her mind went blank. Then, as if by instinct, her fingers pressed the first note, soft, uncertain, but real. The sound floated through the room, and the laughter stopped. Maria hesitated, then played the next few notes. The melody began to form, quiet, delicate, but full of emotion. The more she played, the steadier her hands became. It was as if her body remembered what her mind had forgotten. Years of silence fell away, replaced by a deep, familiar warmth. The song she chose was simple, one she had learned as a young girl in the church. It wasn't grand or complicated, but it carried her heart in every note. The guests watched in silence. Some looked surprised, others confused. They had expected noise, not beauty. The melody filled the hall, wrapping around every person like a soft wind. Maria didn't look at anyone. Her eyes were closed, her expression calm. For those few minutes, she wasn't a maid or a stranger. She was a musician, speaking a language only her soul understood. When the final note faded, there was a long pause. No one moved. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint rustle of fabric as someone shifted in their seat. Then slowly, applause began. Hesitant at first, then stronger, louder. People looked at each other amazed. Maria sat still, her hands resting on the keys. She didn't smile. She simply lowered her head in quiet respect, then stood up. Clara was the first to speak, her voice softer now. "Well, I didn't expect that." Mrs. Delgado smiled awkwardly. "Maria, that was quite something." But Sophia clapped the loudest. She ran over and hugged Maria tightly, whispering, "That was beautiful." Maria felt her throat tighten. She whispered back, "Thank you." The crowd soon moved on to other conversations, pretending nothing had happened, but something in the air had changed. The laughter sounded different, less cruel, more uncertain. Clara didn't say another word for the rest of the evening. Maria quietly returned to her duties, cleaning glasses and clearing plates as if nothing extraordinary had taken place. But inside her chest something stirred, something that had been asleep for a very long time. Later, when most of the guests had left and the house grew quiet again, she stood by the piano once more. The moonlight came through the window, touching the keys like silver. She placed her hand on them gently and whispered, "I thought I had forgotten you." For the first time in years, she smiled to herself. She didn't realize it then, but that small, unexpected performance would change how people saw her forever. The night after the party, Maria could not sleep. She lay in her small bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint sound of the wind moving through the trees outside. Her hands still felt warm from playing the piano. Every note she had touched seemed to echo inside her mind. She had not meant to play that way, and it had just happened. It was as if something deep within her had come alive again, something she thought had disappeared long ago. She turned to look at her hands in the soft light of her small lamp. They were rough, the skin dry from years of cleaning, yet somehow they had remembered the music. It was strange and beautiful at the same time. The next morning, when she arrived at the big house, things felt different. The servants who usually greeted her with quick nods now looked at her with quiet admiration. One of them whispered, "I didn't know you could play like that, Maria." She smiled shyly. "It's been a long time," she said softly, continuing her work. Mrs. Delgado appeared later, calm as always, though her expression was thoughtful. "Maria," she said, "about last night. You surprised us. I didn't know you had that talent." Maria lowered her head. "It was just something I used to do when I was younger, ma'am." "Well," Mrs. Delgado continued, "you played beautifully. People were talking about it after you left. Even Clara seemed impressed, though she would never admit it." Maria didn't know what to say. She simply thanked her and went back to polishing the silver. That day, the house felt lighter. The usual sharpness in Mrs. Delgado's voice had softened a little. Even Sophia seemed brighter, humming softly while arranging flowers. When Maria passed by the living room, she found the girl sitting at the piano, trying to play the same melody Maria had played the night before. "Can you show me how you did that part?" Sophia asked, pointing at the keys. Maria hesitated. "I'm not sure your mother would like me teaching you." "She won't mind," Sophia said quickly. "Please just show me once." Maria smiled faintly and sat beside her. She pressed the keys gently, showing Sophia how to slow down and feel the rhythm instead of rushing through it. The sound that filled the room was soft and warm. "You see," Maria said quietly. "Music isn't about being perfect. It's about telling a story without words." Sophia looked at her with admiration. "You should have been a teacher," she said. Maria didn't answer, but her eyes softened. Over the next few days, Sophia kept asking Maria for small lessons. They practiced quietly in the afternoons when Mrs. Delgado was out. It became their little secret. For the first time in years, Maria felt a kind of happiness she couldn't describe. A feeling of being seen not as a servant, but as a person. But not everyone felt the same. One morning when Maria arrived, she noticed Clara's car parked outside. Her stomach tightened. Inside, she heard laughter from the dining hall. Clara was visiting again. Maria tried to stay out of sight, moving silently through the kitchen, but her luck ran out when she stepped into the hallway carrying a tray of tea. Clara spotted her immediately. "Ah, the famous pianist," she said, smiling in that way that wasn't quite friendly. "I've been telling everyone about your performance. You gave us quite the surprise." Maria lowered her gaze. "You are kind to say so, ma'am." Clara tilted her head. "Kind? I wasn't trying to be kind. I was curious. How does someone like you learn to play like that? Surely not in this town." Before Maria could answer, Mrs. Delgado entered the room. "Clara, please," she said lightly, "don't interrogate my staff." Clara laughed. "I'm only making conversation. But you must admit it's quite the story. A maid who plays like a professional pianist. It sounds like something out of a movie." Mrs. Delgado smiled politely but said nothing more. Maria quickly excused herself and went back to the kitchen, her hands trembling slightly. She didn't like being talked about. She never wanted to be the center of attention. All she wanted was to do her work quietly and live peacefully. But now it seemed everyone had something to say about her. The gossip spread faster than she imagined. People in town started whispering. Some said she had hidden her talent on purpose. Others said she was pretending to be humble. A few even claimed she must have worked for some famous musician before coming here. Maria didn't defend herself. She simply carried on as usual, keeping her head down and her heart calm. Days passed, and little by little the noise faded. Life returned to its normal rhythm. Maria continued her duties, but something inside her had changed. She found herself drawn to the piano more often. When the family was away, she would sit quietly and play for a few minutes. Soft, gentle pieces that filled the empty rooms with life. One evening, as she played Sophia's father, Mr. Delgado walked in without her noticing. He stood at the doorway listening. When she finished, he spoke gently. "You play beautifully, Maria." She jumped, slightly embarrassed. "I'm sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." He raised a hand. "It's all right. No harm done. Actually, I was going to ask if you'd consider playing at our next charity event. People would love to hear you again." Maria shook her head quickly. "Oh, no, sir. I couldn't. That night was an accident. I'm not meant for such things." Mr. Delgado smiled kindly. "You underestimate yourself. But very well, if you change your mind, let us know." When he left, Maria sat there for a long moment staring at the keys. The idea scared her. She wasn't someone who belonged on a stage. She belonged in the background, quiet, invisible, safe. But that night, as she walked home under the pale moonlight, she thought about his words. "You underestimate yourself." They echoed in her mind like a soft melody she couldn't forget. Her small home felt even smaller that evening. She lit her lamp, boiled some tea, and sat by the window. Outside, the town was quiet, the streetlights glowing faintly in the distance. She thought about her past, the church where she first learned to play, the teacher who believed in her, and the dreams she had let go of so many years ago. She wondered what her life might have been if she had never stopped playing. Would she have been a musician? A teacher? Or would life have found another way to pull her back to simplicity? The next morning, she decided something quietly in her heart. She would keep playing, and not for others, but for herself. For the little girl she once was, who had dreamed of filling rooms with music. She started waking up earlier each day, arriving at the house before everyone else. The mornings were peaceful, filled with golden light streaming through the tall windows. She would sit at the piano and practice softly, her fingers remembering more with each passing day. Sometimes she played old church hymns, other times melodies she created herself. The music made her feel alive again. One day, Sophia caught her. She had come downstairs earlier than usual and found Maria at the piano. Instead of being surprised, she smiled. "You play even better now," she said. Maria laughed quietly. "Practice, my dear. It's the only secret I know." Sophia sat beside her, and soon they were playing together, laughing whenever they missed a note. It became their new habit. Early morning duets before the rest of the household woke up. Mrs. Delgado discovered them once but didn't say anything. She simply watched for a moment, then turned away. There was something gentle in her expression that day, something almost like pride, but the world rarely lets peace last forever. A few weeks later, the Delgados hosted another evening event, a smaller one this time. Among the guests was a local journalist who had heard rumors about the maid pianist. During dinner, he approached Maria politely and said, "Excuse me, miss. I've heard about your performance. Would you mind if I wrote a small piece about it for our paper?" Maria's heart sank. "Oh, please don't," she said softly. It was just a moment, nothing important. But the story came out anyway. A week later, her name, or at least her story, was printed in the local paper. A simple woman, a hidden talent. It was a short article, but it caught attention. People started asking questions. Some praised her. Others criticized the Delgados for making her perform. The household became tense. Mrs. Delgado didn't like attention of that kind. "This is becoming a distraction," she said sharply one morning. "I hope you understand, Maria, that we can't have more stories like this. People might get the wrong idea." Maria nodded, feeling a knot in her chest. "I understand, ma'am. It won't happen again." She went back to her work, but her heart was heavy. She had never asked for attention. All she wanted was to play quietly, to keep her love for music alive. But now even that seemed like too much. That evening, after finishing her duties, she sat alone at the piano once more. She didn't play this time. She just sat there, her fingers resting lightly on the keys. She wondered if maybe she had been foolish to let the music back into her life. Then she heard a voice behind her, Sophia's. "Please don't stop." Maria turned. The girl stood there, eyes full of understanding. "You make this house feel alive when you play," she said softly. "Don't let anyone take that away from you." Maria smiled faintly, tears welling in her eyes. "Maybe I'll play just a little," she whispered. And she did, softly, tenderly, as if speaking to her own heart. The melody floated through the empty hall, gentle and pure, carrying a promise only she could understand. The days following the newspaper article were quiet but heavy. Though the story had faded from the headlines, the whispers hadn't. In the town market, Maria could feel the curious eyes following her as she bought bread or vegetables. People who once greeted her warmly now looked at her differently, not unkindly, but with the kind of curiosity that made her uncomfortable. Some would stop her to ask questions. "Is it true you played at the Delgados' party? Or will you perform again?" She answered politely but briefly, always ending the conversation as soon as possible. She didn't want fame. She didn't want her name in papers. All she wanted was peace. At the house, things had changed too. The Delgado family was polite, but something unspoken hung between them and Maria. She could feel it in the air, like a shadow that lingered no matter how bright the day was. One morning, Mrs. Delgado called her into the study. "Maria," she began, "I've been thinking. Maybe it would be better if you took a small break from playing the piano here, at least for a while." Maria's hands tightened around the cloth she was holding. "Of course, ma'am. If that's what you wish." Mrs. Delgado looked almost guilty. "It's not that we don't appreciate your music. It's just, people are talking. I don't want anyone thinking we're trying to make a show out of you." Maria nodded quietly. "I understand." That afternoon, she passed the piano in the living room and looked at it one last time before walking past. She didn't touch it. She didn't even let her eyes linger too long. Days turned into weeks, and her world grew smaller again. She focused on her chores, her errands, and her quiet evenings at home. But something inside her felt dim, as if someone had turned down the light. One evening, as she walked home from work, she stopped outside the small church at the edge of town, the same one where she had first learned to play as a child. The door was half open and warm light spilled out. Inside, she could hear faint music, someone practicing an old hymn. She stepped in quietly. The church smelled of candles and old wood. Sitting at the piano was Father Luis, the same priest who had once encouraged her many years ago. His hair had turned gray and his hands moved slower now, but his smile was the same. "Maria," he said with surprise and joy. "It's been too long." She smiled softly. "I was just passing by. I heard the music." He gestured for her to come closer. "You used to play this one better than I ever could," he said, laughing gently. "Would you like to try again?" Maria hesitated. "It's been a long time." He handed her the sheet anyway. "Then it's time to start again." She sat down. The piano was old, some keys sticking slightly. But when she played the first note, something inside her came alive again. The melody flowed, quiet and pure, filling the church with warmth. Father Luis closed his eyes and listened, smiling. When she finished, he said softly, "You still have the gift. Don't let the world silence it." Maria didn't know what to say. Her throat felt tight. Sometimes it's easier to stay quiet, she whispered. Maybe, he said. But silence doesn't heal the soul. Music does. She left the church that night with tears in her eyes. She hadn't cried in years, but somehow the priest's words touched something deep within her. From then on, she began visiting the church in the evenings. She would play softly, sometimes for herself, sometimes for the few people who came to pray. The sound of her music slowly became part of the church again, gentle, healing, and full of life. Word began to spread quietly through town. People started coming not to gossip but to listen. The old woman from the bakery, the school teacher, even children from nearby streets would sit on the benches, closing their eyes as Maria played. It wasn't a performance. It was something simpler, a kind of shared peace. One afternoon, Sophia came to visit her at home. She looked cheerful but determined. I went to the church, she said. I heard you playing. Everyone was talking about it, Maria smiled. It's just something I do in the evenings. Sophia shook her head. You don't understand. People love it. They said your music makes them feel calm. You should play more, maybe even for charity. Maria laughed softly. You sound like your father, Sophia grinned. Maybe I do. He was right, you know. You have something special. The girl's words made Maria's heart warm, but she didn't answer. She still carried the fear of attention, of people twisting something pure into something noisy. Yet deep down she knew Sophia was right. A few weeks later, Father Luis approached her with an idea. We're hosting a charity evening for the town hospital, he said. Nothing fancy, just music and prayer. Would you consider playing something? Maria hesitated. I don't know if that's a good idea, he smiled. It's not about fame. It's about kindness. Your music brings peace, Maria. Let it help others. After a long pause, she nodded. All right, but only if no one makes a fuss. The night of the charity event came quietly. The church was filled with people, townsfolk, workers, children, even the Delgados sitting in the front row. The atmosphere was warm, not grand like the parties, but sincere. Maria walked to the piano, her hands trembling slightly. She wasn't dressed in fancy clothes, just her simple blouse and skirt. But she carried herself with quiet dignity. When she sat down, the room fell silent. For a moment, she looked out at the faces, familiar, kind, expectant. Then she began to play. The melody was slow and gentle at first, then grew fuller, brighter. Every note told a story of loss, of hope, of finding one's place again. The sound filled the church like light through stained glass, touching every corner, every heart. People listened in silence. Some closed their eyes. Some smiled softly. Even Mrs. Delgado, who had once worried about appearances, looked deeply moved. Sophia watched with tears in her eyes. When the last note faded, there was a long, peaceful stillness. Then, as if waking from a dream, the crowd began to clap. Not the loud applause of a party, but something deeper, more grateful. Maria bowed her head slightly, her eyes shining with emotion. She didn't feel embarrassed this time. She felt free. After the event, many people came to thank her, old neighbors, children, even strangers. Your music touched my heart, one woman said. It reminded me of my mother. Another man added, It's been years since I felt peace like that. Maria smiled at each of them, humbled. When the Delgados approached her, Mrs. Delgado spoke first. Maria, she said softly, I owe you an apology. I thought silence would protect you, but I see now that your gift isn't something to hide. It's something to share. Maria's eyes filled with tears. You were only trying to help, she said gently. Sophia hugged her tightly. I'm so proud of you, she whispered. That night, Maria walked home under a sky full of stars. The air was cool, and for the first time in a long while she felt light, as if the weight she had carried for years had lifted. She unlocked her small door, lit her lamp, and sat by the window. The town was quiet, the streets glowing softly under the moon. She thought about everything that had happened, the ridicule, the surprise, the silence, and now the peace. She realized something important. It wasn't about proving herself to anyone. It wasn't about applause or recognition. It was about being true to who she was, a woman who had once lost her song and found it again. The next morning she returned to work at the big house as usual. She cleaned, she organized, she tended to the garden. Life carried on, but something in her had changed. She walked with quiet confidence now, her eyes brighter, her smile gentler. The piano in the living room no longer felt forbidden. Sometimes when the house was calm, Mrs. Delgado would ask softly, "Would you play something, Maria?" And she would, not to entertain but to fill the home with warmth. Even Clara, who visited again months later, had changed. She approached Maria one afternoon, her tone surprisingly sincere. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I was cruel that night. I thought it would be amusing, but I was wrong. You humbled me." Maria looked at her kindly. "It's all right. We all learn our lessons in different ways." Clara nodded, almost relieved. "You're a remarkable woman," she said quietly before leaving. Maria stood there for a while, thinking about how life had a strange way of bringing people full circle. As time passed, her music became a part of the town's life. Children learned simple songs from her. The church hosted small gatherings where she played for free. People began calling her the piano lady, not out of mockery, but affection. Her story spread not through gossip, but through gratitude, the story of a simple woman whose quiet talent reminded everyone that beauty could come from the humblest places. And though she never sought fame or fortune, she had something far greater: respect, peace, and the knowledge that her music had touched hearts. Late one night, long after the streets had gone still, Maria sat by her window again. The same breeze that once carried her loneliness now carried the faint sound of laughter and life from the town below. She closed her eyes and smiled. In that moment, she realized she no longer played to remember her past. She played to celebrate her life. The years passed quietly, like soft pages turning in a well-loved book. Maria grew older, her hair streaked with silver and her hands marked by time, but her heart remained as gentle as ever. She still worked part-time for the Delgado family, though her chores were lighter now. They treated her more like family than staff, often inviting her to join them for dinner or tea in the garden. The grand house had changed too. The once bustling parties had slowed and laughter was softer, more meaningful. In the corner of the living room still stood the same polished piano, a little older now, a little out of tune, but loved more than ever. Maria still played it sometimes, especially on quiet afternoons when the sunlight poured through the tall windows and painted golden patterns across the floor. The town had changed as well. The bakery where she used to buy bread was now run by the baker's son. The children who once sat cross-legged on the church floor to listen to her play were now grown, some with families of their own. And yet whenever people passed Maria on the street, they greeted her warmly, their faces lighting up with genuine affection. "Good morning, Señora Maria," they would say, and she would smile, replying softly, "Good morning, my dear." But among all the changes, one thing remained constant: the music. Every Sunday evening she still played at the small church. It had become a quiet tradition. The pews would fill with people, families, workers, even travelers passing through town, all coming to listen. No one charged a ticket, no one dressed fancy. It was simple and beautiful, just as Maria liked it. One evening, after finishing her piece, a young man approached her. He was tall, perhaps in his 20s, carrying a small notebook. "Señora Maria," he said shyly, "I've heard your music since I was a boy. I'm studying in the city now, piano actually. You inspired me." Maria's eyes widened with gentle surprise. "Did I?" she asked, her voice full of wonder. "Yes," he said with a smile. "When I was little, my mother used to bring me here to listen. You made me believe music could speak without words." She felt her heart swell with quiet pride. She had never thought of herself as a teacher, yet here was proof that her music had reached further than she ever knew. She placed a kind hand on his shoulder. "Then keep playing," she said softly. "And never play to impress. Play to feel." He nodded with shining eyes. "I will." That night, as she walked home through the familiar streets, she thought about how life had a way of circling back, how what we give quietly often returns in the most unexpected ways. Her small home looked the same as it always had. The same lace curtains, the same wooden chair by the window, the same teapot that had served her countless evenings. But now there was something new, a sense of peace that filled the air like soft music. On the table sat a few letters from people she had met over the years, thank you notes from students she'd taught, invitations from the local school to perform, even a small card from Clara, who had moved away but still wrote every year. Clara's last letter said, I will never forget that night, Maria. You changed the way I see people. I hope you are still playing, Maria smiled as she reread it. Life had a strange way of healing people, even those who once hurt you. One afternoon, the church bell rang early, and Father Luis came to visit her. He was older too now, walking with a cane, but his spirit remained lively. He sat with her by the window, sipping tea. "Do you know," he said with a smile, "there's a music festival next month in the city? They want to invite local musicians from small towns. Someone mentioned your name." Maria laughed softly. "Me? Oh no, Father, I don't belong at festivals. I'm too old for such things," he chuckled. "Old? You're timeless, Maria, but don't worry, I told them you'd probably say that," she smiled. "You know me too well," he leaned forward, his tone warm. "You've spent your life giving joy to others. Maybe it's time others gave some to you." After he left, she sat thinking for a long time. The idea of traveling, of standing before strangers again, frightened her a little. But deep inside, a small spark of excitement flickered. She hadn't performed outside town since that night so many years ago, the night that had begun in humiliation and ended in awe. Still, she didn't decide right away. She needed time. A week later, a small envelope arrived. Inside was an official invitation, printed on fine paper, with her name written carefully by hand, Maria Alvarez, invited to perform at the regional music gathering. City Hall, Granada. She held the letter gently, as if it might disappear if she gripped it too tightly. It wasn't about fame anymore. It was about sharing something true one more time. After much thought, she accepted. When the day came, the town gathered to see her off. Sophia, now married and living nearby, hugged her tightly before she boarded the bus. "Play from your heart like you always do," she whispered. "I will," Maria promised. The bus ride to the city was long. She watched the hills roll by, the fields changing from green to gold under the sun. When the tall buildings appeared in the distance, she felt a flutter in her chest, a mix of nerves and wonder. It had been so long since she'd seen such a big place. At the festival hall, people were busy preparing, tuning instruments, arranging chairs, rehearsing. Maria felt out of place among the polished performers and glittering lights. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a small bag. Some people looked at her curiously, unsure who she was, but she smiled politely and waited her turn. When her name was finally called, the lights dimmed slightly and she walked to the grand piano on stage. The audience murmured quietly, probably wondering about the elderly woman taking the seat. But Maria didn't mind. She had learned long ago that silence before music was a gift. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let her fingers find their place. The first notes were soft, gentle like a whisper. She began with a simple melody, one she had composed herself long ago, inspired by her childhood in the countryside. The tune carried the scent of rain on earth, the laughter of her brothers, her mother's lullabies, and the distant toll of church bells. It was her life, woven into sound. Then, as the piece grew, she shifted into something brighter, a melody that spoke of second chances, forgiveness, and the quiet beauty of growing old with grace. The hall was utterly silent. Every note lingered in the air, delicate and pure. When she played the final chord, she lifted her hand slowly and opened her eyes. For a heartbeat, there was silence. The same kind of silence that had once filled the Delgados' living room years ago. Then suddenly the room erupted with applause, warm, thunderous, and real. People stood up. Some wiped their eyes. Others smiled through tears. Maria bowed her head humbly, her heart full. It wasn't pride she felt, and it was peace. A lifetime of quiet moments had led her here, and she had given everything she had through her music. After the performance, several young musicians came to speak with her. They wanted to know about her life, her journey, her secrets to playing with such emotion. She told them the truth. There is no secret. You must live before you can truly play. That night she stayed in a small inn by the edge of the city. As she lay in bed, the echoes of the applause still warmed her heart. She didn't dream of fame or glory, only of home, the church, and the sound of her own piano waiting for her. When she returned to town the next morning, she was greeted with cheers and flowers. The whole community had been waiting to hear how it went. She laughed, embarrassed but joyful, thanking everyone with tears in her eyes. Father Luis, smiling proudly, said, "I told you, timeless." Maria only smiled back. Maybe so, Father. But even timeless things must rest. That evening, she went to the church and played one last time, not for anyone in particular, just for herself. The notes floated softly, dancing with the flicker of candlelight. It was a song of gratitude, for the life she'd lived, the people she'd met, and the second chance that music had given her. As she finished, she looked out at the empty pews and whispered, "Thank you." From that day on, Maria continued to live peacefully in her small town. She didn't play as often as before, but her music remained in the hearts of everyone who had heard it. Children learned her melodies. The church kept her piano polished, and the townspeople spoke of her kindness with fondness. Years later, when she was gone, the town held a small concert in her honor. Sophia's children played the same song Maria had performed at the festival, their fingers trembling slightly but filled with love. The people listened in silence, remembering the woman who had once been mocked for her simplicity and who had, through quiet strength and grace, shown the world the power of true talent. And in that moment, it felt as if Maria herself was there, smiling, listening and whispering, "Play to feel, not to impress." Her legacy wasn't written in newspapers or carved in stone. It lived in the hearts of ordinary people who learned, because of her, that dignity and beauty often hide behind the humblest faces, and that sometimes a simple woman can teach an entire town what greatness truly means.